Hello, Year 11. Today we're going to be looking at our text, Lord of the Flies, and in particular we're going to be looking at our characters, Jack and Ralph. Okay, we're going to focus on them and their progression and development through the novel, and Golding's intentions for them, and these characteristics they have, and these intentional characteristics they've been given, methods used to convey them. So first, we just want a quick recap on what you should be looking for and the mark scheme that we use for this. So we have our 3 or 4 AOs in this one, where we are focusing on making sure that you have a critical style throughout your essay, your response, and constantly using textual references, including quotations. You are analysing the language in detail. And that's really important, really deconstructing and pulling apart the evidence you have to support your argument, your idea, your debate, and using analysis to really discuss that. And you need to show an understanding of the contextual elements of our text, okay? So the historical background, the time period it's written in, Golding's experiences, and then obviously you get there's extra 4 marks as well in this text, in this part of the exam for your SPAG, your spelling and punctuation, and all of that really comes into that AO4. Okay, you also need to make sure that in your AO2 the form and the structure are commented about. Okay, we are not just looking at the language used by Golding, but the type of text that you're looking at, and clearly it's an allegorical novel where there is a meaning, either a sort of political meaning or political understanding of the text, or a comment on society, comment on politics at the time, or comment on society. That's what an allegorical novel is, and this is a clear example of that. And then the structure of the text as well, how the novel has been structured, the chapters. So why do we begin at a particular time? Why do we see this addition of characters at a particular time, at a particular moment, and the effect of that? Okay, so we're going to focus on we're going to look at Ralph first, but really I want you to have a little look at what we have on our PowerPoint. So this is Golding himself saying this, and it's really important that we understand the reasons behind his creation of Lord of the Flies, and the characters and the settings he uses. So he says Lord of the Flies, and this is coming from himself. Okay, Lord of the Flies was simply what it seems sensible for me to write after the war, when everybody was thanking God they weren't Nazis, and I'd seen enough of that, enough to realise that every single one of us could be Nazis. Nazi Germany was a particular kind of boil which burst in 1939. That was only the same kind of inflamed spot we all of us suffer from. So I took English boys and I said, look, this could be you. This is what really boys could come to. And that's really important. He's made it very clear why he has written this novel, that his idea is that mankind has all these elements within them, and that mankind has all these possibilities, and evil and those darker sides of us and society, it could happen to any one of us. And by taking these English boys, the youth that they give us, and the innocence that we assume with these English young boys, and we look at how they have been affected by society and the situation they're put into. And clearly Jack and Ralph are a great example of that. These 2 young boys who are now found themselves on this island, a microcosm of the society that Golding saw and had experienced, and look at how they have reacted to this. Okay, so when Ralph originally arrives on this island, he really is, it's like a romantic adventure to him. Okay, he has a real strong sense of play, and it's a real romantic adventure at the beginning. The rest of the boys are having concerned about playing and having fun. He decides actually that he's going to start to build the huts, and he thinks of ways to maximize the chances of being rescued. This is something that's really early on from Ralph. And there's a real sense of democracy when he is then voted in from the other boys, okay? And the reason they vote him in, because he represents this sense of law and order. And he really clings to this hope of being rescued. And this is something the boys really respect from him early on, okay? And the idea that he is, although this is a wonderful island at the island to be on at the beginning, or what the possibilities he has, that he wants to return to civilization. And that's really important that we see that from Ralph. And when the boys arrive on the island, we have this quotation at the top here: a time when play was good and life was so full that hope was not necessary and therefore forgotten. And there was this real sense of a sort of playfulness, and hope wasn't necessary. So they didn't need to think about hope, but actually Ralph brings that back, and because of that, and these morals Ralph has, the boys really respect that, and then because of that, he is then voted in by those boys. That obviously is in conjunction with Jack's appearance on the island. But even when we have this issue about who will be the leader, even Jack has to agree and says, I agree with Ralph, we've got to have rules and obey them. After all, we are not savages. And clearly an ironic line for what then develops along our novel and along our characters, which is really important. Remember, these characters symbolize certain things, and Ralph, this symbolizing law and order, and we see this very early on. It's important we think about structure, and this is an early something we notice early on with him. He is our most central character that we see or hear from in this novel. His is the central consciousness that we have, and mostly everything we see is from his point of view, and that's really important, and that really has a bearing on how the novel ends. We see it from his point of view. He respects this, has this representation of law and order, and he is fair, and that's really important to notice, that with it is fair, okay? However, what's really important to remember about Ralph at the beginning is that he isn't perfect. He is our protagonist, but he is by no means heroic. In fact, we do need to remember that he mistreats Piggy at the beginning of the novel, and our quotations here to support that, Ralph shrieked with laughter, and when Piggy asks him not to share the fact of his real name, he does share that with the other boys. And that's really important to notice as well, that he isn't perfect by no means, and he is a fallible character. And again, something that Golding wants us to ensure that we are aware of, because that is going to be important to how he does develop across the novel. Okay. Also, that Ralph is our first character that notices, or the idea of the conch. It's Piggy that is able to think about how to use it, but he's the first person to notice it, and obviously the conch becomes really important as a symbol later on, linking to the idea of civilization. So putting him and the conch together very early on in the novel is a method and a structural technique that Golding uses for us. Okay. But then unfortunately what happens is Ralph's leadership doesn't go to plan, doesn't continue, and the group, as we know, starts to succumb to these savage instincts that Golding is really trying to highlight for us, and his position declines very quickly, in juxtaposition really to how Jack's leadership rises. Actually, eventually most of those boys leave, apart from Piggy, leaves Ralph's group, and are then led by Jack, which then in turn leaves us to have Ralph left alone to be hunted. He is still committed to civilization, and his morality is really strong, and that's important to notice. And his main wish is to be rescued, and to return to the society of adults. and he is really determined, and we see this bravery throughout, but his leadership does decline. Okay. And what we also need to notice about Ralph is this transformation into savagery, a real key theme within our novel, and they do come in hand with our characters. These methods, the characterization is a method used by our author, and what happens unfortunately to Ralph is this transformation. Okay, so we have a character who has been clearly structurally important, that we notice early on. He's this symbolization of civilization, of order. Okay, and that's important structurally because Golding has made us aware of that. So then to see this decline, to see this transformation, is more distressing for the reader, and it makes us really aware of Golding's real intentions, that even someone who is a symbol of civilization and order can be fallible, and the idea that mankind has this essential illness, okay, and can infect even the strongest and most moral of innocent characters, which obviously Ralph is portrayed to us. So his transformation is slower than others, but we clearly are allowed to see it. Early in the novel, he viciously accepts the hunter's raw pig meat and gnaws on it like a wolf. And that's important that we notice that. He is caught up in this savage ritual when Roger plays the pig. Okay, he's a part of the unthinkable gang that then murders Simon. Again, this all coming from this character who symbolizes law, order, and most importantly, the civilization. So this clearly a fallible character. And then in the last, well, then obviously when Piggy then is killed, Ralph runs for his life and obeys an instinct that he did not know he possessed, that he did not know within inside him. And of course, that is clearly linking to Golding's comments on mankind and the mankind's essential illness that he did not know he possessed. And then we see the fact that when Piggy is murdered, he to make sure that he wasn't attacked by the savages, he's cornered like an animal. Okay, and then ironically he sharpens a stick out of self-defense, and then he becomes the murderous hunter himself. Okay, so he says whoever tried, and it's obviously alluding to the fact that it would harm him, would be stuck squealing like a pig. This is the boy, this is the character, this is the symbol of civilization early on in our novel. And then alone in the forest, he brutally attacks the first adversary he sees. He launched himself like a cat, stabbed, snarling with a spear, and then savagely doubled up. This is when Ralph is trapped under the underbush. He wonders what a pig would do, for he clearly is in that same position. Okay, and so Golding's intentions for this characterization, this symbol of law and order, are clear. He uses his message clearly for our reader. Okay, these quotations at the end of the novel, where he wept for the darkness of man, these are quotations that you have to know. Okay, these should be embedded in your long-term memory, that this is the metaphor for the darkness that Golding argues that every person is capable of, that we have we are fallible, and in certain circumstances we could fall to this same savagery. It was an accident when he is in denial of the essential evil, commenting on what had happened earlier, which really portrays the idea that he's an innocent character. And then they were savages, it was true, but they were human, is when he's thinking about what has just happened, and Ralph, he's hoping that humanity is lost, and then therefore Golding is portraying this importance of forgiveness and understanding of someone who himself was involved in savage acts, you could argue. Okay, So really important we see that development of character over the novel, and structure is really important. And I haven't really commented on the language techniques or the words or use phrases. That is something you would do at home. But our sort of development of character of Ralph clearly is linked to Golding's intentions and Golding's views that mankind has this ability and fallibility for savagery and this essential illness. Looking at Jack, when Jack then first arrives on the island, it's really important to notice the difference, the juxtaposition between him and Ralph, because this is clearly something that Golding wanted us to be aware of very early on. Okay, a power-hungry man that, oh boy, sorry, I should argue that. Loves to exert control. He's used to exerting control in his choir. Okay, he has a very militaristic attitude early on, the way he talks to the choir boys and tries to control them, or is used to controlling them. And there is a real sense of conflict between him and Ralph really early on. Jack's physical descriptions, we are very aware that he is the antagonist in this. Our protagonist has been made very clear to us in Ralph, and is very clear to us in his physical descriptions. He's ugly without silliness, and the fact that he's dressed in black, the connotations that come along with it. His thirst for power and thirst for being in love, and in love with being in charge, is really important. He isn't a good and kind leader, and he also reacts very badly to Ralph's election as a role of chief, because this is something that he wouldn't be used to. He was within the choir the head boy, and the immaturity, the fact that he could sing C sharp, which indicates obviously that his voice had not broken yet. The fact that he believes that is a reason for him to be in charge again shows his immaturity from him. But the sense that he's so used to being in charge, okay, very arrogant young man who talks about I ought to be chief, and we early on see this sort of power hungry young man. Adjectives to describe him: a destructive boy, a tyrannical leader, you could even argue he becomes. And obviously you're something you should be aware of, tyrants and tyrannical leaders, something that Golding had huge experience upon, and had seen through his own eyes tyrannical leaders and how they exploit and abuse their situation, just as he does with Jack. This characterization of him is clearly a metaphor, a symbol of those tyrannical leaders he had seen through World War II and previously had seen, okay, and a savage character that turns to savagery easily. He's got this fiery red hair, this insatiable lust for meat, and in complete opposition to Ralph, okay, and he never fully embraces this authority of the conch, and in the end, as his savagery grows, it clearly destroys it and ignores. It destroys the conch and then ignores the signal fire, all symbols of civilization and law and order. He enjoys this responsibility of others, and when he hunts, he has this compulsion to do so, which is really important. It's not because that he feels like he has to feed the others. There is a compulsion within him, this savage nature within him, which is really important to notice. And his life around the island is all about the idea of tracking and killing, making rituals, and he has a real obsession with the physical transformation. So the way face paint is used and clothing is used within his transformation is really important, that we are allowed to see physically how Jack transforms, not just in the languages used, but actually the fact that how he dresses and the face paint that is used. However, on the other hand, clearly different to how Ralph worries and is concerned about how his appearance is changing, this dishevelled look that Ralph notices upon, which Jack doesn't. Okay, he's bloodthirsty, and his growing obsession with hunting represents not only him, but how the rest of the group are losing their sense of civilization. They are becoming more barbaric. His aggressive way of speaking, that's something that happens really early on in the novel as well. His aggressive way of speaking is important. We notice early on that foreshadows this decline, this violent behavior that he will then we are allowed to see later on in the novel. Okay, and our intentions, or sorry, Golding's intentions for Jack are again to show man's essential illness, this evil within inside, the fact that we are all fallible. You know, he clearly is this excuse me, this antithesis of good versus evil, are portrayed as a savage character on the island. However, this was still a young boy on the island, and he this then comes to play right back at the very end, actually, when he reverts back to the frightened boy, and you could argue that this was still a frightened boy that was hiding behind his face paint, and you know, maybe someone who does need civilization and law and order, and that's maybe Golding's sort of comment on that, you know, that we do all of us need this civilization, this law and order, as a society to work, this fairness to work, because look what has happened to these boys along the way. Okay. And then the other thing I just wanted to comment on was the idea of the human psyche, and Freud was someone who subscribed to the idea that there are we have these different human behaviors, okay, within us, and you could kind of, he split it into 3 different sections: the id, the idea, the ego, and the superego. And you can place Jack and Ralph into 2 of these, actually. The id, the idea, is driven by the pleasure principle, okay, that that you are driven by what you want, the pleasure you take from others, okay. And I think that's what we really can see from Jack. Although I've just noticed on my PowerPoint there is a mistake there, actually, that I put Jack as level-headed and Ralph was self-appointed, and that should be in opposition, actually, so you'll have to excuse me for that. Jack was self-appointed, wanted himself to be leader, controlling, and you could argue he is this idea, a prime example of somebody who comes from the human psyche of pleasure principle, doing something for themselves rather than for the benefit of others, okay. However, Ralph is the idea that, well, the ego is the idea that it comes between the id and the superego, and it's the idea that is a mix of everything, that there is this element of having the pleasure principle. However, it is the idea also that you are looking after others and thinking of others, and so both of those characters fall into those human psyches. So that's something I would suggest, if you haven't looked at previously in your lessons, it's something I would certainly suggest you research and have a look at, okay. So that's really it for today on Ralph and Jack. I haven't really done any analysis or focused on quotations, like I said before, because I think that's something you can certainly be doing at home. But for me, what I really wanted to focus on is how our characters develop over time, and what we've been offered as a method, you know, methods, techniques by Golding to really think about what his message was. Yeah, that we all are fallible, that we all have mankind's essential illness, and what Golding had seen, he was using the characters and the young as a microcosm of the society he had lived in and the society he believed was happening at this time, and he was trying to it's an allegorical novel, remember, and we are supposed to learn from these situations that we then read. Okay, we learn from this and we take on board the mistakes others have made, okay, and a comment on society. So thank you very much, Year 11.